Good morning, good morning. So honored to be a part of this podcast. We're in Led by the Word today. We are in the new book for us, Esther. And I remember, oh goodness, it's been 5+ years ago we did a study on Esther, back when we would choose a couple books here and there in Game Changers. And I tried to find my old notes for that. Digitally, I am not organized at that point in time. I've gotten much more organized now. Couldn't find them. Restudying out the book. This book will speak to you. This book is just powerful. And honestly, today I know we're doing a youth Bible study, but I'm going to talk a little bit about leadership approach. So we got the king, and we got his wife Vashti. Now listen, I'm not going to talk about all the sinful approach. I'm not going to talk about the issues here. There is a disagreement between the king and the queen. So the queen gets chased out and stepped down. So the king needs a new queen. So he does an approach. He does a seeking. He does a commandment to the nation. And at this point, you got to keep in mind, there is a villain. There is a bad guy.
Yes.
Tell us about the bad guy.
Spoiler alert, getting a little ahead, but his name is Haman. Something interesting about the book of Esther is it's a complete story. Like we've been in Chronicles, we've been in Kings, and it's literally been a chronicling, right? Like this happened and this happened and this and this. This is a complete and total story in itself, this little book. Like from start to finish, you have all the elements of this amazing story focused, yes, on Esther, but it's more focused on Mordecai working through Esther in her position to save a nation. It's incredible.
So Haman, he's got a whole plan. He's got a whole thing going on with his villain, his arch nemesis, Mordecai. And Haman's the bad guy here. And he's like, we're going to destroy all the Jews. We're living in a time right now, they're still trying to destroy all the Jews. We see Hamas and what's going on. Well, let me give you a spoiler alert. It ain't going to work. It ain't going to pan out. It ain't going to happen. The genocide will not come to these people, God's chosen people. So Haman, he's doing this. So Esther, she gets this opportunity. And I think it's chapter 1, verse 12 or 17. It's somewhere in there. And she's chosen. And they say, and she's beautiful in her countenance. Everything's going to work out. So Esther, she hides her race. She's like, you know what? I'm not going to let them know. I'm going to keep this low key. Because this is a serious time.
Sure.
This is a high, volatile conversation to have. So she comes in. She's beautiful. Okay, she's going to marry the king. She's going to go in, and I want you to see this. There's been times in your life you're praying, you're seeking God, and then you see that moment, you're like, everything's going to work out. You ever been there?
Oh, yeah, sure.
You're like, okay, God's the God of power, God's the God of ability. I am now the bride of Christ. There's this potential, everything's going to be fine. And you know what Esther hears? You got to go 12 months in preparation. I'm afraid a lot of us give up in our 12 months waiting.
Oof.
And there is so much development in that. You know, God, there's times where you're like, whoa, no, you've put a call on my life. There may be a call of ministry. There may be a call. You may be in a pastoral call. You may be in an evangelist call. You may be in a teacher call. You may be a worship leader in the making. But you ain't doing nothing to do with your call. And you're like, no, Micah, I know God spoke to me and told me about my call. I know that my pastor told me in my ear and said it. God told me personally in prayer and said it. Another person, I've had multiple confirmations. Why am I not in my call? Listen, it's because you're in a time of preparation for your call. This is where we got to step up and understand our call has never been about us. Esther becoming the queen was never about her having power. And we'll see that in the coming weeks. We're not going to talk about all that today. We're only going to chapter 4 today. It was never about her walking around and saying, I'm better than all you people. It was never about her having the really cool gold crown. It was about her being used to help people.
And King Xerxes, like in chapter 1, it kind of sets the tone, the scene, if you will. This is not a godly environment. This is not a godly man at all. Please read chapter 1. It thoroughly breaks it down. But we always kind of, I think even subconsciously, we kind of think, oh, well, God's going to call me to the pleasant. He's going to call me to the convenient. He's going to place me in an environment. Oh, yes, there you go.
I want to be in the comfortable.
And this is everything but, I mean, yes, you have the religious aspects, which is like a total like opposite of what she is. But then you have the race thing. where Haman's out like, yeah, I'm gonna murder all your people. Like the volatile was a perfect word you used. But God had called her. I mean, we're gonna hit that in chapter 4, that iconic verse of, for who knows if you're called for such a time as this. He placed her in that place of inconvenience, in that place of she could have died. And it was an either or. It was, I do love, I'm getting a little ahead, but in the other chapters we're going to cover, if I perish, I perish. Because Mordecai was like, if you don't do this, you will not be spared. And she said, if I go before the king, I could also not be spared. So it's like, choose the struggle, and she had to put herself out there.
The one that's victory potential for others.
Oh, yeah.
So I got a call of a young man, and he said he was praying, and he said he saw it as plain as day, that he said, I was talking and helping people.
Mm.
And I was like, oh my goodness. So I asked him all the details. As Dad says, I'm not the man with the answer, I'm the man with all the questions. And he said, I believe I'm going to be in some sort of way of testimony, some sort of way of speaking. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. That's a great call to be speaking and to help somebody. So that was the end of the conversation. Months later, he said, Mike, I just don't know. I've not done it yet. I'm not put in that place. Well, here, I'm going to give you the end of the story. We spoke again recently. He's in a leadership position of his job, and he's got 85 people that he manages. He said any given night, 3 or 5 people come in for prayer, come in for questions, and he's been sending me pictures of someone, and he'll mark out the names, but someone said, hey, listen, you prayed with me. And I went home, and I'm tearing up the divorce papers.
Wow.
You prayed with me. I went home, and I have the faith now. And this is people that, some of these people going to church. I went home, I was down, and now I'm praying for my kid. I'm believing for a healing. We ain't going to live in this sickness. And I told him, I said, you had a small picture of one microphone one time. I said, you're now 6 days a week, sometimes 5 days, depending on the schedule, every day leading people. And I said, I see you as a Moses in a wilderness to this group. And he said, Micah, you're telling me this, but he said, I saw it already. He said, it's like God's using me on such a level right here that I want you to hear this. If you've ever lived a life where you need glasses, you look at the world and you think differently, because there's stuff at a distance and you're like, I know what that is, but I can't see it clearly. And you either gotta squint and strain your muscles if you ain't got your glasses with you, or you gotta go approach. When you get a vision in your life, Esther's given a vision, and she's probably thinking, okay, I'm getting the crown. I'm gonna go up there, I'm gonna take a scepter, I'm gonna hit the ground, I'm gonna say, let the Jewish people live. It didn't work that way. There was preparation, there was time, there was effort, there was fasting, there was fear. There were all of these things in the ingredients of this cake that was coming against her. Like Jessie said, if I perish, I perish. We can say that. You get to a place to where you're sitting in your chair and you think, here in a little bit, I could die.
Right.
I mean, literally, just think of that level of pressure. But I was called for this. I was made for this. So today we're just talking and we're going in. If you're called, you're going to prevail.
Yes.
If you're called, it's going to be supernatural. It isn't going to be you. Esther thinks at moments, I'm sure, okay, I have to do this. Esther was just a vessel used by a creator. And when she steps in, when she walks in, the king, Xerxes, sees her. But what's really happening is it's a vessel by God with a preordained ending.
And I also want to encourage you, if you feel like, well, I'm nobody, how is God going to use me? First of all, it's His might, not yours. But Esther had kind of a humble beginning. I'm not saying Mordecai was poor. He probably wasn't. But Mordecai was her older cousin that had raised her because she didn't have any parents. And that was a really big deal back then. I know a lot of homes are a little bit broken, or, it's not uncommon in this day and age. But this was a big deal. She didn't have a lot in her own namesake. So I love that, she comes to this place and she's obtaining favor with the chamberlains, and, she's like really moving up. They had a special house for the women that were brought before Xerxes, right, for this 12 months of preparation. And she found so much favor with the guy in charge that she even had the best place within that house. So at every step, she was finding favor. So I love how you could see it. Maybe she saw like the whole future, like, oh my goodness, maybe I could be queen, right? So she gets up there and she is, but she had some of the most humble beginnings, at least in herself. And I want to encourage you, like, you don't have to be like, well, you know, I don't even know who my dad is, or, you know, my family isn't full of pastorals or, you know, ministry, or I wasn't raised like this, or it doesn't matter. God loves to use people. I love that Esther is just a vessel. You could just be a vessel, but what else is there? That's like the highest honor.
And we look at Haman. If you go to chapter 3, we see, like, I'm calling this chapter Enemy's Tactics.
Oh, yeah.
Because Haman, he's got this all built out. He's got this all planned out. And if you just look at the Haman side of the story, it's pretty much over. Mm-hmm. Because the main connection that Esther has, this King Xerxes, he's ranking up here. You don't get higher than Xerxes. And Xerxes, he's promoting Haman.
Oh, yeah.
He's listening to Haman. He's working with Haman. It's like the end is already determined, and it's going to be awful. It's going to be a mass execution of everyone she loves, everyone she's related to, all her people, and herself once it comes out that she's a Jew. But Esther's, I love the verse, who hath believed my report? Mm-hmm. Esther's got a report that's better than Haman. And right now you may be in a place in your life where there's a Haman in your ear, where there's a spirit saying, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you, this is what the doctor report, this is what the divorce papers, this is what the addiction of the person you're praying for, this is the ending. But let me tell you, who hath believed our report? God is the God of abundance. He's the God of life. He's the God of healing. And Esther gets to walk in all those good things. Mm-hmm. Esther gets to arrive in all those good things. Yeah. The journey there, it's like looking through a glass darkly. Mm-hmm. I feel like if there was a picture, if there was a little meme to describe Esther in the beginning and the middle, it'd be this. Because she said, I can't see. Mordecai, you're telling me that there's this potential. Yeah. My cousin, right?
Yeah.
Cousin Mordecai, you're telling me that there's this potential victory. You're telling me there's this chance. That you're telling me that if we work with our God. But I look way out there. And I don't know.
Right.
You know, I got a year at this place. I've got to prepare. I got all this stuff going on. Mordecai, I just don't know. Mm-hmm. But I want to encourage you, trust in God. One of the young men that's a greeter at the church, he was praying for somebody, and he was saying, you know, it was a lot of fear. And I told him, I said, I want to encourage you in something very, very, very powerful. I'm only 30, but I've yet to see God fail.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, I read the book, and I've yet to read about him failing. I don't think he's in the failing business.
No.
And I know when you're in those dark times and you're squinting and you're wondering what's going on way out there, encourage yourself in the Lord like David did and say, God, I don't think you're going to make an example out of me as being the first fail.
Right.
God, I think you're going to use me just like you used everybody else. I'm going to be a vessel just like everybody else. I'm going to be put in purpose just like everybody else. And this is going to be another testimony of your power.
I love it. What kind of kicked this off is Mordecai had beef with Haman from the jump. And so Haman, he gets very wroth or very angry. So he kind of makes his problem with Mordecai a problem with all Jews. He takes this problem before the king and makes it the king's problem, quotes, because he comes up to the king, I think it's in verse 8 of chapter 3, and he's like, you don't want to suffer these people to like disobey your ordinances, right? Because you had everyone like bow before me, and this guy's not bowing, and like, you know, I just don't think they're that great. So what if, like a 2-for-1 deal, we get rid of them, and the people that, you know, bring them in, we're going to bring like in money for the royal treasury. Like it's really great. King Xerxes, like, you should do this. And King Xerxes like, wow, an absolute win. Let's do this. And so he puts this into play. When Esther finds out about it, she's like, Mordecai, why are you in sackcloth? Like, what is going on? And he explains this whole plot to her, and he's like, you got to go. She's like, well, I could come before the king. And if he does this royal scepter thing, you know, I found favor and I can bring this issue before him. But he hasn't called me in like the past 30 days. It's not looking good that he's going to call me into his presence. And Mordecai like straight up calls her out. I'm not saying she said that in an excusing manner. She could have just been explaining the situation to him and how it works. And he's like, forget your 30 days, forget your protocols. Like, come on. Like, we are not going to be spared. You know, even in your palace are not going to be spared. So he kind of calls her out on that and is like, you have to do something. So I think a lot of times, you know, when we're always told, well, stand up for what's right, you know, if you're the only one standing up. Mordecai stood up. Literally, he did not bow down. And there was pushback. And sometimes we're kind of like shocked. We're like, wait a minute, this is not going easy. This is not going like I thought. I thought I was going to have, the protection of the Lord. And of course he did. It was behind the scenes. But when you're in that, I love how you're saying, it's almost like looking through a glass darkly, which I know is a scriptural reference. But we see that with Esther, and we also see that with Mordecai. And I love how you see the parallels in both. One's in a palace and one's outside the gates. And it's almost like they're traveling the same journey.
You can see Mordecai, he's really just a shadow of a Christ to come. A mediator, speaking truth, fighting on our behalf. And you want to know something? Sometimes you're going to be hated just because you're a child of God.
Oh, yeah.
And we see that with Esther. Mordecai is the type of Christ, and Haman is the type of Satan. And he hates him. But because he hates him, he's got to hate them all.
Yeah.
And we get in this thing, we're like, man, Satan's really out to get me. Satan's really out to get me. Satan's out to get all the children of God. It's not just you. And if you come into a church and you're in that victim mindset, man, he's really out. I promise you can go person by person and you can find stories. You can go person by person. You can find, oh my goodness, the body is under attack.
Constantly.
But there is a God. There is a Creator. There's a King of Kings. There's a Lord of Lords. And He is fighting for me. And He is putting me in places. He is anointing me. And He is using me as a vessel. Chapters 3 and 4, like Jesse said, those two combined. It's the tactics of Haman. It's the rinsing and the sackcloth of Mordecai. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because next week we're going to start in chapter 5. This story gets great.
Oh, yeah.
So if you want, go ahead and read ahead. Read Esther just read the whole book and study it through with us. We're going to get into worship and praise next week. And I couldn't be more thrilled. Thank you for tuning in this week. Take a moment to like this, subscribe on our YouTube channel, and share this with a friend. God bless you.
God bless you.